Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I'm your host Nathan P. Butler, and this time we are taking a look at another oddball release as sort of a pair of releases that we're looking at here in episodes recorded on the same day, hence the same shirt here. Boy, I hope I didn't wear the same shirt in the previous ones right before that, or it's going to look like I recorded all of this at once, which sometimes I have to do. What we're looking at here this time is definitely more of a positive thing than what we saw last time with The Audience Strikes Back. Call this the palate cleanser of the two episodes. Here we're looking at a newly released Star Wars documentary that focuses in on Star Wars fandom, and particularly Star Wars fandom in Texas. We've seen Star Wars focus things on different groups like the 501st. We've seen it sometimes in relation to individual parts of the world, often with a smaller focus, like say there's, the UK garrison featured at one point, or that sort of thing. But to actually have something where it's focused on Star Wars fandom, specifically within a state, was an intriguing concept, even though I'm not in Texas. This is one I was made aware of by a viewer of the show named Jack, who pointed me to Etsy. Now, Etsy is usually not where I'd be going to buy Star Wars home media. But it turns out that this is a very small print-run documentary that the creators are selling through Etsy right now. There may be a subsequent print, there may not. We'll talk about that in a moment. But right now, this is a documentary that only has a print run of 100 copies. So if you're looking for it, be a good thing to jump on Etsy to search for this now. You can just search by the title. It is a documentary entitled In the Lone Star Wars State, instead of just In the Lone Star State. This is the DVD release here. Says theatrical version in red up at the top, has Texas there in the Lone Star Wars State, has a couple of stormtroopers and the creator there who is also the host. DVD. It's in one of those interesting blue kind of cases, almost like a Wii U kind of case. The back here has information about it, some of the individuals who are in it, cast crew information, copyright stuff, not rated, the Urban Journalist Films, DVD video, follow us on Instagram, legalese, all that kind of stuff. 2023, released in 2024, I believe, and then 123 minutes, color, not rated, and so on. And then it's just the title, then the individual there with DVD video. Inside, the disc itself, very much sort of designed around kind of a feel of maybe like 80s packaging here. It says In the Lone Star Wars State with the little starburst kind of thing or explosion kind of thing behind it, like you would see as a sticker on toys. Images of some toys, including the creator as a toy there. Not rated, DVD, 2023, color, 123 minutes, not rated. Legalese and stuff. Company name again, disclaimer underneath, theatrical version there in yellow. And this particular edition, this limited edition initial version, has this on the shrink wrap when you get it. It says first time on DVD, limited time only, and that yellow text that I need to see here, or I guess a purple text on yellowish green, says includes over 35 minutes of footage not seen in theaters. So apparently had a theatrical release. There's also a sticker of the logo there, which is nice. There is also a little sheet here, advertising sheet, that has the creator, almost like a Last Poor Yorick kind of thing, from Hamlet, wearing the shirt from it, and then Instagram information down here, and then an advertisement in Topps card back form for their t-shirt. Then an advertisement for the fact that this will be coming to Blu-ray sometime soon, probably next year in 2025. So it says, quote, Texas Star Wars fans feel the force in new movie about them. Craig D. Lindsay, Houston Chronicle. Then you've got an image of the Blu-ray. At the bottom, it says, the extended director's cut documentary featuring over 6 hours of full unseen interviews, segments, cast Q&A, and behind the scenes on Blu-ray disc for a limited time. Coming soon to In the Lone Star Wars.etsy.com. That's a way to find it. Otherwise, just search the title. Then not rated and legalese on the bottom. The back, and I'm going to cover this up here. If you get the DVD, there is a coupon for 15% off of the Blu-ray release if you decide to pick up the Blu-ray release later. And then you also have from the shrink wrap here, this shot here, says 15% off. Gosh, it's very hard to read. 50% off in the Lone Star Wars State Director's Cut Blu-ray combo pack with proof of purchase from this DVD copy. See details inside. So kind of playing off of the idea of, you know, the old giveaways if you had proof of purchases from action figures, that sort of thing. Now, let me note here, before we go on, from messaging with the creator here, that, yes, this is just a run of 100 for now. I actually wound up with 2 of that 100 because one of them wound up showing up with a case shattered. I asked if I could get a replacement case, and they actually sent me a full replacement copy, so 2% is in my hands, apparently. If they do another reprint, they would use a dark purple or clear box with no coupon for the Blu-ray and no stickers on the inside. They may or may not do a reprint, though. The Blu-ray, like I said, is in the works right now for 2025 with a limited run. Also, they're very much in the camp of those that particularly prefer physical media, so there is no plan right now for any type of digital release or anything. As he says, I'm a big believer in physical media, given that the cover, their art, and everything contributes to the narrative of the film. So if you want to get it, you want to see it, you got to get it physically. So if I can read the back of this, it gives you sort of a sense of this. It says, as the saying goes, everything is bigger in Texas, and Star Wars is no exception. This documentary is a love letter to all the Star Wars fanatics we know and love. Alejandro Cabrera, a renowned San Antonio producer/director, takes us on a fascinating journey, delving deep into the Star Wars fandom in Texas and exploring its unique connection to the Western genre. This epic, inspiring story introduces us to several Texans, sharing their personal experiences and intimate stories of fandom. You'll feel like you're part of the Star Wars universe. And this is something that is a documentary by, edited by, basically everything except costume construction by Alejandro Cabrera. And it is actually a pretty enjoyable documentary. I didn't quite know what to expect with this being something based on a specific state's Star Wars fandom, but basically what he does is, it was created over, I think it was an 8-year time span. It runs a little over 2 hours. And it's sort of like, we're going to do segments almost like a Dateline style. We're going to do, is that a dated reference? We're going to do segments on different aspects of Star Wars fandom and tie those aspects into Texas, talking to fans in Texas. So for instance, there's a point where they talk a lot about costuming, you know, with the 501st and with the Rebel Legion and with Saber Guild and all this kind of stuff. Mandalorian Mercs comes up. And it's talking about it broadly, because you can talk about it broadly, using specific examples and interviews from within Texas itself. So for those who are outside of Texas, this is still a fun thing to view. It's not that not being in the state will make you feel slighted at all or that you can't relate to it. Texas is the backdrop. Texas is the context for an interesting look into Star Wars fandom. As I said, it's done kind of in a Dateline type of way, in the sense that you have kind of a host leading you from segment to segment to segment. The host stuff is usually in like skit form. There's one point where he's in a cantina. There's one point where he's walking on stormtroopers. There's one where he's in a trash compactor. If there's really only one thing that I would say about the production itself that was a little bit jarring, is that you can tell some of the ADR is off a little bit in some of those lead-in segments, like they must have had to re-record the audio, so sometimes it doesn't quite match the lips. I think there's one point at which a Tanika sister says something like, "What?" and I don't think her lips move at all. But that's a pretty small thing as far as that goes, because those are just to kind of lead you into, you know, let's take a look, and to jump into the individual segments where he's actually traveling around the state and doing these interviews. And sometimes it's quick little bits, sometimes it's little interview bits sprinkled here and there to help with the narrative. Sometimes there's actually a stop and focus on this group of people or this subject here. So just kind of running through some stuff here. Interviewees include people like droid builders, artists, toy collectors, Saber Guild members from the Jakku Temple. That is the other thing I would say is a miss for me with this, is that initially when introducing people talking about it from the Jakku Temple, they spell Jakku correctly. In the segment when they actually get to the costumer people and talk about Saber Guild and have Jakku Temple up in everybody's credit, Jakku is spelled wrong straight through. It's almost like there's, like I have to do sometimes, it's almost like a copied and pasted subtitle to put the person's name in, and they were just going to plug in the name, and Jakku was spelled wrong once, and it just got copied and pasted into all these other instances of talking about people from the Jakku Temple, where it's spelled with just one K. You have someone there from Alamo City Movie Talk, the 501st Legion, Geek Out SA, which I think means San Antonio. There's a museum curator, an author/collector, general fans, influencers/collectors, museum visitors, lots and lots of different people. So they focus in on different groups along the way. Lance Hathaway and his son Connor in Orange, Texas, with a Star Wars themed home theater, which is not just, hey, look at this home theater. It plays into the impact of Hurricane Harvey in that region, and how that affected the actual building of this home theater. I can appreciate that when they talk about watching, A New Hope for the first time on VHS, they actually show the 1984 version of it on VHS, because you can tell by the packaging. Within that discussion, or around that time within it, they talk about a comparison of, fandom with Star Wars to fandom of other things like cowboys or NASCAR and things like that. Talking about how nobody does Star Wars like Texas. They were the original rebels, so to speak. And of course, there's the cowboy tropes. You also have the hair buns that were actually popular in the real world around the time of the Mexican Revolution. Then they jump to the Bullock Museum for the Cowboys in Space stuff that they do. Talking about Western influences. They talk about how, at least at the time that interview was happening, Mandalorian had premiered the previous week. And Frank Cordes, who is the curator, talks about the Western influences there. They talk about the C-3PO Dick card, right? That early Topps card of C-3PO that basically looked like he was flashing everyone that they had to go back and edit. A collector has one of those to show. Or maybe that was in the museum. They talk to a Kenner expert/collector in Dallas. They go to the Texas Toy Museum in Austin. In that segment and others, lots of use of the word plethora, though I find that fitting because it's Texas. And what made plethora something that was in the zeitgeist out there? Three Amigos, right? Texas, Mexico kind of area down there. A plethora, of course. They go to the Holocron Toy Store in Austin, where they talk to the people who work there, but then also talk to customer Chris Kelly and his wife Amanda and their daughter Tabitha in Dripping Springs, talking about how collecting is sort of a package deal. When you marry a collector, that's part of them. That is an accepted part that you bring in. They talk about, shelves with stuff behind other stuff to have room. I could definitely relate to that. Talking about how, trying to cut off collecting and saying, no, honey, this has to stop, would be like altering that person's personality, so a partner shouldn't want to change that about their partner. They spend a lot of time talking about the Force Fridays in terms of collecting. The 2015 Force Friday in San Antonio for Force Awakens, which was a disappointment. The 2017 Force Friday 2 for The Last Jedi, which was easier to find stuff. And then about how Toys R Us kind of closed its doors after that point. And the 2019 Triple Force Friday for The Rise of Skywalker, where Star Wars seems to have taken a backseat to Frozen 2 and the frustration among collectors about that. There is a trash compactor skit shortly thereafter in which we see the finding of a Phantom Menace VHS and the note that someone's trash is someone else's treasure and so forth, which I can feel because there were a lot of those out there. Of course, unfortunately now, one man's trash is another man's thing they're going to get graded and put on eBay and try to sell for an extortive amount of money relative to what it actually should sell for. But that's a whole separate thing. They talked to the droid builders, including BB-8 builders. There's a guy who's got an insane C-3PO that he has built with actual dialogue from Anthony Daniels, and Anthony Daniels' voice being emulated by a computer program where he can make it say whatever he wants and sound kind of stilted, but sound like Anthony Daniels. They talk about the 501st, where the Star Garrison is the only one that's larger than that is the one in the UK. And lots of squads of the 501st in Texas. The North Texas Squad, the Texas Gulf Coast Squad, the West Texas Squad, the Central Texas Squad, the Imperial Rough Rider Squad, the Desert Inferno Squad, and the South Texas Squad. They also then focus on the Saber Guild, who dress as Jedi. That is not a fan group that gets a lot of attention in documentaries very often. The 501st certainly does, but not as much with Saber Guild. That's the Jakku Temple Saber Guild from Austin is the one they focus on, mostly at a convention in Houston. They talk about armor parties for the 501st where they get together to build armor and whatnot. This then brings us into talking to Tanner and Melissa King of Katy, Texas, outside of Houston, who's a married couple who both do costuming, Mandalorian merch stuff, 501st stuff. Their kids have Star Wars names, which I can certainly appreciate, given the fact that my son is named Cade after Cade Skywalker. You've got my former partner in podcasting, Mark Herleman, with Gavin and Jaina and so on. They had a Star Wars wedding. Again, I can appreciate we had Star Wars theme to our wedding, though not as heavy on the Star Wars there. But if you've ever seen images online of the cosplay of a female Han Solo with a male enslaved Leia attire, that's them. That's the King family, or the King couple. I spent some time talking to Heather Trupia of the Saber Guild, who uses Jedi Star Wars stuff in elementary school as an elementary school teacher. They represent the idea of the fixed mindset and growth mindset, which I won't go into as a teacher, but that's a whole thing. Fixed mindset and growth mindset as Vader for fixed, Yoda for growth. She does a lot of Star Wars Reads Day stuff and gets the whole school involved. They show hospital visits, not just by the 501st, but also by the Saber Guild. And then the final segment focuses in on Daniel and Ashley Fleetwood. And if that name sounds familiar, remember right before the release of The Force Awakens in theaters, there was a Star Wars fan with cancer. And there were petitions to try to get Lucasfilm / Disney / J.J. Abrams, etc., to let him see the film before he passed, because the chances were he was a huge Star Wars fan but would not make it to December to actually see it in theaters. Force for Daniel, they called it. Well, Daniel is from Spring, Texas, which puts him square in the region for this. And he had actually interviewed Daniel back at the time, him and his wife, and then came back later to interview his widow to see how life had or had not, in some cases, gone on. Talks a lot about the empowerment of fandom movements, the raising of sabers for Daniel at the Wookiee Walk, what Daniel actually got to see, which was a 4-hour unfinished cut, the difficulties of his widow having to mourn essentially in public because this had made them public figures. Comments on how J.J. Abrams went on Howard Stern and this came up, and Stern was very insensitive about it, but J.J. tended to play it fairly well. And then talked about her shortly after his passing, they'd known this was coming for a long time. They kind of had anticipated it, talked about what to do afterwards, talked about what she should do. But how about a year after his passing, she started dating a gentleman by the name of Tony Stanley. And then about a year after that, they got engaged. They got married in 2018. They had a kid in 2019, another in 2022. She talks about it as sort of a circle of life with that period of Force Awakens to Rise of Skywalker, the birth of a child, the loss, the healing, and having another child, how it's carrying on Star Wars in a sense from generation to generation, even once someone is gone. But certainly she got a lot of crap as a public figure, kind of an unwilling, mostly public figure after the fact, for daring to date again, as if she was disgracing his memory, even though they had talked about it and so on beforehand. And it sort of ends with that story of Star Wars fitting into life going on and the profound nature of Daniel's story into, fittingly, what I assume the creator knew was a takeoff from Joseph Campbell about following your bliss. So it winds up being something that it feels like it's initially kind of, focusing a lot on the collecting side. It eventually goes to the costuming. So a lot of the stuff that you see is stuff that we've sort of seen before. We've seen documentaries focusing on the 501st and charity efforts. We've seen them focusing on collecting and so forth. And we've seen ones talking about ties to real history and so on. We've even seen ones talking about tragic stories. But this weaves it together in an interesting way where all that stuff comes together with a very specific backdrop of Texas, of that region, and traveling around to actually speak with all of these different people. It's an enjoyable view. Again, it's about 2 hours long, a little bit more than 2 hours, covers a lot of ground. I'm not sure that it is terribly groundbreaking in some of the stuff that it covers, but the way it covers it is well done. And I just kind of appreciate just this approach of saying, look, our community, Texas is enormous, but thought of as sort of our state community, this is how we are part of the big picture of Star Wars. Not an approach we see often. Sometimes we see that with countries in Europe that lean into that sort of thing, but we don't tend to see that kind of thing in the U.S. very often. unless it's on a specific fandom group, not necessarily a a state, a city, or whatever. So definitely one that I enjoyed. If you want to get a copy of it, remember you got to go quick because there's only 100 of these from that first print run. If you're trying to get it on DVD, you can go ahead and grab that there. Keep an eye out. 2025, we'll see a Blu-ray release of this thing and a limited run as well. But again, if you're going to look for this, don't look on Amazon or something. It's being sold through Etsy. Do a search for In the Lone Star Wars State on Etsy, and you'll be able to find this, hopefully still in circulation, to be able to pick it up. I believe that's also where you can pick up the t-shirt, though I have not done that at this point. I may. We'll see. With that, though, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the home video viewers, no matter what country or state you're in, but at least for this episode, especially if you're in Texas.